Couple of questions to start out today. Um, why are we here today? Why have many of us been here at almost every heart to heart since 2020, which, we're talking in the hundreds? Many of us have been here for almost every one of them. So, why are we here today, even if it's your first day? And why have many of us been here almost every time since 2020? The great spiritual adept Ram Dass, Be Here Now guy, changed a lot of lives when he put that book out in the 60s. Ram Dass answered both of these questions beautifully in a simple 8-word sentence when he said, "We are all just walking each other home. We are all just walking each other home." That's another sort of definition of community, even if it's the first time here. You're part of this kind of walk home. Now, understanding what home means uh, helps, because it's a metaphor, it's a symbol pointing to something else. And a couple of talks ago, we talked about everybody's journey home, whether you know it or not, whether you have a group like this or not. Everybody is trying to go home. A lot of times, you feel like you're walking alone, and you got nobody to walk with you. It's great to have a kind of spiritual community. Now, I'm sitting in technically my literal home, but we're talking here at Loose Leaf Hollow in the Zendo, but we're talking about symbolic home. And in that talk about everybody's journey, I outlined it like this. Uh, we all start as nobody, and then in our journey, with a lot of help sometimes, a lot of struggle, we can become somebody. And most people in our culture think maybe that's it, to become a really Time Person of the Year. Somebody might be it, but that's you're really making it. That's the top of the mountain, but not in the spiritual traditions or contemplative traditions. uh, Somebody is great. Yeah, we all have to become somebody, but then we have to keep going, cross this frontier, which can only be crossed uh, if you have some kinds of contemplative practices. It really, either that or a lot of lifetimes, and like thousands of lifetimes. If you never found it, we have a contemplative practice here, so we're fortunate. But once with some kind of contemplative practice, or several perhaps, then you can become everybody. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean, you're still not putting on your own pants in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. But that's again symbolic, to go from nobody, little infant who can't even turn over, to somebody, having an education and a career and an active life. But then to what happens when you retire and you become like what I consider myself a formally important person, an FIP. You lose your role, you know, and it's actually the place to be. We're very fortunate. Most of us we're out of the rat race, and we have time now to cross this threshold into being everybody. And these three legs of the journey really correspond to the body, the mind, and then the heart. And they're fueled by different things. This is just a bit of a recap of the last few weeks. They're fueled by different things. Like at first, we're fueled by fear as a young child, and then maybe in midlife, we're fueled by anxiety. It's not quite fear, but it's anxiety. We're pretty cool. We have a roof over our heads. We got a job and whatever. We're doing all right. But it's still, there's this little anxiety. We can't quite, we're refrigerator hum at best for the anxiety. You don't quite notice it, but it's there. And then finally, the third, when you cross that frontier into becoming everybody, The only way to cross that frontier really is fueled by love. So from fear to anxiety to love, that's another picture of it. That looks pretty good to me. Now, home, again, to every, we're all walking each other home. We're all just walking each other home. So the path of return we're talking about, and this is almost universal in the contemplative traditions. I mean, I know the Buddhist traditions and the Christian traditions best, but even Sufi traditions, Islam, and Hindu, those four I know pretty well. Judaism, not so well, but a little bit. But they all talk about there's a path of return to the sacred. That's the central path, because those three, nobody, somebody, everybody also are. It's the survival. It's about survival. Then it's about strategy, the strategic, the survival operating system, the strategic operating system, and then you harness the sacred operating system. So it's a path of return to the sacred, to our essential nature, as the Buddhists call it. If you're a Christian, it's to the inner Christ, the path of return to the sacred, which is everybody's home. When you actually return to the sacred. Now, number one on the Enneagram, as some of you know, that gives you a little pointer to where the work needs to be done. It isn't who you are. It just gives you a kind of pointer to what is the structure of your wounds. And, I grew up thinking perfection was the goal. Perfection was home. I'd be home when I finally became perfect. And that's an impossible journey, and a very stressful journey. And there was a particular line in the Gospels. I was a little want to be a priest, a little Catholic guy, thinking, I'd be a priest because, my father in this life was not perfect. He wasn't even around. And so I figured, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Good, I'll be a priest. I had that. And so I read the scriptures as an early young kid. And that was a particular sort of landmine for a one on the Enneagram, where we're trying to be perfect. All right, yeah, I can go for it. It says so in scripture. Well, at some point in my journey, when I really, after letting go of Christianity totally and whatever, and just forget it, there's no way there. When I came back to it in a really strange way, odd way, I got interested in hearing what Jesus might have sounded like speaking Aramaic, because I always knew the English-speaking Jesus. So I studied Aramaic for a couple of years with Neil Douglas Klotz, a great Sufi teacher, who ironically spent most of his life trying to give an Aramaic Jesus, a fundamental Jesus, back to Christians. And he had a different translation of that line, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And it changed my life when I just saw his rendering. He said that really in Aramaic, the closer meaning was be whole as the universe is whole. That was a game changer for me as it just was. And meditation then made sense to me. Because trying to perfectly still your mind so there's no thoughts, that was a fool's errand. But meditation is a big part of the process of regaining our wholeness. I want you to see, because we stress meditate. This is a meditative, a contemplative community. We have meditation right in the center. And I'm really trying to always encourage people to have a practice in some form, Christian, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. One that is your flavor that works for you. But meditation is a big part of the process of regaining our wholeness. That's also what to become everybody means. You become whole, and we can only become whole if we heal our wounds. We all are wounded. The picture at the beginning, some of you didn't see it, but most of you did, was of a little fawn nestled, in the grass. And animals will do that when they sleep, of course, but also when they're wounded. They'll sort of curl up and just try to heal. So there's thanks to Mary Wright from up at Michigan City for that image. She saw it on one of her walks. But now's the time that the fawns are being born. Ron saw one down at the Hermitage the other day. This is the time where it's better weather for the fawn, a lot to eat, et cetera, et cetera. So our wholeness is the healing of wounds. Heal and whole, same root word. And so we all have wounds. And how does meditation fit into that? It's a big part. So here's the poem of the week. I write a poem every morning. It's just part of my practice. And this is one that, everyone, most of the time, there's at least one that I think would be helpful. This is called Creating a Space for Grace. Actually, I've been writing this for as long as I've been doing the work here at Loosely Follow. But it came out this way. And I think this might be helpful. And then I'll read it, and then we'll reflect on it a little bit, and then we'll go into meditation, hopefully with a little leverage. I start this off with a quote from Kathleen Dowling Singh. Some of you know the woman. She wrote The Grace in Aging, which is if you don't have that book, you should get it. But she also had The Grace in Living, The Grace in Dying, and then finally Unbinding. She wrote 4 books. She was a hospice nurse for 40 years in Florida and a Buddhist practitioner. But she says most of us have been wounded. Most of us are like a wounded deer running through the woods. Most of us are like a wounded deer running through the woods. We just keep running, wounded for decades, pushing ourselves in spite of the wounds, maybe even running unaware of the wounds. That's from The Grace in Aging, which is a fabulous book. Almost on every page you get something that's that helpful. She says, most of us have been like wounded deer running through the woods. Now, the woods is the dark woods of Dante, of course. You got to take this on a symbolic level. Most of us have been like wounded deer running through the woods. We just keep running, wounded for decades, pushing ourselves in spite of the wounds, maybe even running unaware of the wounds. Yeah. I mean, that's when Freud and Jung and depth psychology came into vogue in the beginning of the 20th century. It was quite suspect, of course, in ancient Vienna, but still they were onto something. They were talking about the unconscious was where most of the wounds are stored. We know some of the wounds. My dad was never around. I was aware of that. But most of the wounds happen between the age of 1 and 6. Trauma happens later, but that was our initial trauma period. And to survive in that childhood realm, we couldn't be aware. We didn't have the awareness to be aware. We were just little sensate beings. And so most of that went right down into what I call the hurt locker, the deep freeze. When you put ice on a wound, it stops paining you, and that's a survival thing that thankfully we all had. And so you just put it into the unconscious. But it's what Freud and Jung said is, even though you're not conscious of it, it's actually calling the shots in your life, even though you don't know why you do things. Why did I do that? Well, there's a force down there in the unconscious, in the hurt locker, you see. Robert Bly once said, we all are born with he called it a little black pouch on our side. And when, your father gets drunk and comes home and starts beating up your mother, you're 2 or whatever, how do you deal with that? Well, you just take that whole experience and put it in the little pouch, a little black pouch. And he says, marvelous. And it works. And we survive. But he said, by the time you get to midlife, that pouch is about 2 football fields long. He said it's a little hard to get in elevators with it. So that is what we do in the second half of life or the third quarter of life. The third and fourth quarters, when we're not just running from pillar to post trying to keep the roof over our head, we're not in the rat race. We're sort of, a lot of us are lucky enough to be out of that. We have some time, okay, to deal with those wounds that are still unknown and maybe unhealed. Yeah, so that's an image of this whole poem. The poem is I'd be stinking rich if I had $1 every time someone sighed and said, "Oh, I want to meditate every day, but I never find the time." And I always smile and reply, "You will never find the time. Your time has been entirely captured by our culture. There is no time to be found. You need to create the time." I wrote this for everybody, but especially for so many folks that are no longer in the 9 to 5 rat race, no longer have kids to raise, folks who either have way too much time on their hands or those who say in utter amazement, "I'm much busier now than when I was working full time." No matter who you are, you can create a graceful space of 20 minutes or so during the day to just sit down, to just lay thinking aside. For those 20 minutes, to just lay your to-do list aside and just be. Just be. Practicing meditation creates a soft bed of long green grass where we rest like a wounded deer and let the healing begin. But never think for even a second that you're healing yourself. Yeah, so I want to just reflect on that a little bit, and then we'll just jump into the thing itself, into some meditation. Well, many people have told me, I really mean it. I really want to get a meditation practice, but I never seem to find the time. Well, newsflash, our whole culture is there about capturing your time. Just think of the internet for a minute. Okay, think of all the stuff that captures our time. It's about capturing your time, then showing you an ad, creating a desire, and then you buy something. That's what our culture's, as a consumer culture, is focused on. They're pretty good at it. People say, "I just can't find the time." Even though some people have a lot of time on their hands now, they're not doing a 9 to 5. And then some other people, they're busier than when they were actually working full time, which happens too if you retire. Some of you are that person. Some of you are either of those persons. There's no time to be found. You need to create the time. Carve a space. When you realize that, because part of the process of crossing that final tier that leads you home is you've healed some wounds in the meditation. You've healed the wounds, and perhaps what it really means to live stably there for most of the rest of your life and for whatever future lifetimes is, because all of the wounds have come up. See, when you meditate, it doesn't matter what form, you're creating a space and an invitation, and then the wound that's ready to be healed can come up. When we're so busy and our awareness is everywhere, there's no space for it to come up, you see. So when you create a time just to be empty, silent, and open, well, then that's where the material comes up. And it's not always great. That's why actually some people, I think, avoid meditation, because when they do that, things come up. And it's like, it's the opposite of putting ice on the wound. When the things come up into your life, now they're thawing out. And some of that initial pain might come up in tears. It might come up in a kind of strong emotion. Where did that come from? You're feeling great. Now all of a sudden you're resentful. All of a sudden you're pissed off. And so that happens in meditation all the time. That's the process. And if you can just be stable and stay there and be aware of it, hold it, and in effect, embrace it. This is tough to learn because mostly we try to push it back down because that's how get it out of awareness. But more and more the wounds come up. There's pain, but now you're an adult. You're not a little 3-year-old. You're an adult. You can be aware of it. You can hold it. You can embrace it, just sort of the way adults would hold a little fussy baby or a baby in a lot of, crying their head off. They're there, So it's sort of that thing. That's the process of healing wounds and meditation. But if you don't carve a space into the day to where it's a healing space. I call it creating a space for grace. Yeah, it's going to take a long time. And some of us don't have that much time, in terms of this incarnation, Everybody's going to make it eventually home, the Tibetans say. The question is, how many lifetimes will it take? And how much suffering in between? Think of living 100 more lifetimes as you are, to get there little by little. Well, meditation facilitates the process. And then I have the image that we started with, that image of the deer lying in the grass. Perhaps meditation offers a soft bed of long green grass where we rest like wounded deer and let the healing begin. Now, the last sentence sort of seems to come out of nowhere, but never think for even a second that you are healing yourself. That's the point. The what's often called the self or the false self or the ego. I mean, a lot of times it gets a bad rap, but it's the best definition of ego I ever heard was that it's the sum total of all your wounds, and a defensive kind of shield to keep any more from occurring. Think about that. So how could that heal you? How could you heal yourself? How could the ego heal? It's not interested in it. It's interested in not having any more pain. So it has this defensive shield, which is often, what's called your persona, your false self. But so you can't heal it. It takes grace, and it takes a space for grace. Luckily, there is grace. We're in a universe that wants us to be whole like it is, wants us to come home to the wholeness. So there is grace all the time, but just the way the moon can eclipse the sun, well, our habit energy, which is defensive, it could be a perfect grace shield, and then nothing really changes. So this is all, meditation is where we drop the deflector shield, and that's thinking. We lay thought aside. We just settle in for a few minutes. Yeah, and that's what we're going to do right now. So I think that's enough. The poem will be printed in the Monday morning musing if there's something you found helpful there. Okay, but I think that's enough, Jill.